was a nice introduction and a really great open mic. I enjoyed listening to everybody. I thought I would open with a poem from my first book, The Velocity of Dust. And just a note about this one, the title is Sisyphus. And Sisyphus was a character from Greek mythology who was banished to the underworld, where for eternity he had to push a stone up a hill only to have it roll back down. And I used this as a metaphor for my father, who was also a high school teacher for many years, and I recall him at the end of his career seeming very burnt out, and the poem is about him. And I think since Frank read that poem about the slam and reading off the page, I'm going to try to do it. I'll probably mess up, and it's being filmed, and it'll be on DVD. I'm going to try to do it anyway. I'll keep the book close by just in case. Sisyphus. Here, in this hard place, my face to the gales amid the crags the past sculpts, I search the glacial slope for my father's loping form, and for the proud boulder dropped like a briefcase on a kitchen floor. What more is there at the end than the harsh wind of words to recall the climb? The myth a burden drives into bones as deeply as a life of work, the falling and the gathering up, the falling and the gathering up of hope, and always something farther beyond the topmost rock, so that now I see my indefatigable father, high above the sea of apathetic faces, with his tie loosened and his hair gone gray, fathering thoughts of letting the stone roll from his tweed shoulders, and down on his knees, nearly relinquishing optimism, the way these stunted trees, regaled by wind and thin air, collect themselves into themselves, yet remain ever green and alive, even this high, even this untouched. I have known the withering and the giving in, the withering and the giving in always, in the weakness that comes after rolling back down into valleys and the fog a child loses himself in purposely, for the need to be unguarded, what I grope through even now, blindly downward, scrambling with the balding weight I carry for a time, drop and let roll, carry for a time, drop and let roll. I may have left out a word or two. All right, so I'll read one poem from my second book, too. This book, much of it was written in Oregon, maybe several hours from Portland in southwestern Oregon, in a wilderness setting where I found myself in 2005 living off the grid in a cabin, doing this crazy writing residency, all alone. Well, I had my dog with me. But there was really no other people around for about 50 miles in this wild and scenic portion of the Rogue River. And it's just a wonderful place. It was a strange experience, and I'm glad I had it. And if I had the chance to go back, I probably would do it again. So I spent many days alone, and this poem is about that experience. It's called One Day in July. All that I am, wrapped in a hammock sway, and time sounded in the small turnings of sprinklers and fat flies. Green gone brown, road dust asleep for the least wind or any cloud's offering. As easily as I lie here, I could die here for all that moves me, grow bad as an apple and fall in some patch of shade, forgotten by all I've forgotten, and sweet as the legs of bees. Out of this moment, if ever I recall it, will rock the soft pendulum of the human I was, as naked and doomed and malcontent as Adam still ribbed, and mythic only to me. Who else will remember the bear I saw a few hours before, standing in a fur like a logger, its breath like an engine, or know another 7 days of silence and a single droning plane? And if the same could be said for every man alone, seeing the strange and ordinary and storing them like seeds for the tender shoots of memory, passing time with little else to grieve, then it's no wonder God created Eve. Got lonely out there at that cabin. So the title of my book is after a poem in the collection, which is infamous in Guilford. And some of you may remember the last time I was here a few years ago, there was a certain character in town who took umbrage with this poem because he thought it featured a sex toy, and probably should not have disabused him of that fact and let him just think that. It would be a much more interesting poem, but it's called A Glossary of Chickens. And I'll just give you a quick story about how this poem came about. I was at a writing residency, another one, up in the Adirondacks, a place called Blue Mountain Center, where I've done a number of residencies, and I like to go. It's one of my favorite places. And there was another poet there, Henri Cole, and he and I would go up and we'd put the chickens in the coop at night so that they wouldn't get killed by foxes or coyotes. And one day he walked up to me and he handed me these photocopied pages from a book on poultry raising. And it was the glossary from the end of the book. And he didn't explain anything. He just handed them to me and walked away. And of course I loved all the words. And having raised chickens myself for a few years, I just delighted reading these. And so I wrote this poem as a thank you to him, and I left it tacked on the kitchen door knowing he would find it when I left. A Glossary of Chickens. There should be a word for the way they look with just one eye, neck bent, for beetle or worm or strewn grain, gleaning, maybe, between gizzard and grit. And for the way they run toward someone they trust, their skirts hiked, their plump bodies wobbling, bobbling, let's call it, inserted after blowout and before brood. There should be terms, too, for things they do not do, like urinate or chew, but perhaps there already are. I'd want a word for the way they drink, head thrown back, throat wriggling, like an old woman swallowing a pill. A word beginning with S, coming after sex feather and before shank. And one for the sweetness of hens, but not roosters. We think that by naming we can understand, as if the tongue were more than muscle. Thank you. This poem is another chicken poem, but in a different sense. It's called The Wimp. They called me the wimp, and I was. Not for any reason I can put my finger on, but because, in general, I lacked wherewithal. I was a poltroon, and none of them knew that word or any better than wimp, and probably they still don't. If one of them does, I wouldn't know so. Those years before and during and after high school swirl in my memory now like squalls of snow, like the time when, on a whim, in late December, my friends and I told our folks we were going camping in the wildlife refuge 2 towns over, the flakes already falling, our gear pitiful hand-me-downs, none of it insulated or waterproof, rum bottles clinking in our knapsacks like muffled toasts to the end of our young lives. Inches had fallen by the time we bivouacked at the Caratunk Cave. Wet kindling whispered. Not even leaves would catch. In 5 o'clock dark, we crawled into the tent, soaked and shivering and stoned. No one willing to state the obvious, that we might die out there in what we all knew by then was a blizzard unpredicted. Who it was had the wherewithal to suggest we pack it in, I don't recall. But I remember humping, drunk and exhausted, through 2-foot drifts in the hushed woods, my toes gone numb in thin boots, Our flashlight beams a mix-up mystification panning over moguls of snow-covered brush. I wouldn't have minded expiring there under the laden arms of a spruce. The past is a distance, and life has, at times, been a stumbling through thick drifts, batteries dying. They'd think of me still as the wimp. So there's the future, like the lost pair of sneakers we found in the spring, and growing between their double-knotted laces, a sapling. Can't believe our parents let us go on that camping trip. We really did find that pair of sneakers in the spring, too. Many of my poems grow out of my teaching, and this one did from a lesson that I was doing with a group of seniors, a lower level group, and my co-teacher and I were instructing on the sonnet form, and on the spot I tried to write a sonnet on the board. And a few weeks before this I had brought in an owl pellet to show them that I had found in the park, and a number of them had in middle school taken apart owl pellets, so they were delighted to do this again. And so I made the poem about that experience. And the poem sort of went through its own swallowing and spitting up again and is no longer a sonnet. But this is it. Owl pellet I show my students. This gray loaf full of tiny bones, a gift I found on a park road, like something a car drove over, once mouse or mole, but now a skeleton sewed into one undigestible measure. No more than half an ounce, this used to be whiskered skitterer who once engaged in nocturnal pleasure. Not so unlike you, reckless, reckless youth. Scapula, fibula, tibia, what is it that surrounds all these bones? In truth, I cannot say. Just as I cannot say what will one day under its caped wings gulp you down whole, my soft little mousies, my tender moles. Lot's wife. Sometimes, let me start over, sorry. Lot's wife. Sometime soon after the embers cooled, after dust clouds settled, after the last strings of smoke, hoisted by desert breezes, cleared the air, they must have come, people of those 3 cities remaining, to pick among the charred bones, the rubble of what was once temple and house, stable and brothel, to kick at stones, to tug at handles of buckets, blades of shovels and spades. Later, raising ash plumes in the scorched plain, cloths at their mouths and noses, eyes burning, neither fearful nor repentant, but full of wonder, full of the scavenger's overabundant hope, they would have found her. Even as now, some men encounter the woman of their dreams, beauty of the movie screen, princess they capture with a camera's flash, girl whose finger brushes theirs when she takes their card at the market register. Found her, that is, not as the person she was, but as whom they needed her to be, and, man or woman, each of them would have wanted a piece of her. Standing in that wasted landscape, she must have seemed a statue erected there as a tribute to human frailty, white, crystallized, her head turned back as if in longing to be the girl she had been in the city she had known. And they must have stood there, as we do, a bit awestruck, taking her in for a time. And then, with chisel and knife, spike and buckle, chipped at her violently and stuffed their leathern pouches full of her common salt, salt with which to season for a while their meat, their daily bread. right, so at dinner tonight, a number of us were talking about our dogs. And Ed said he has a dog who's about the age of mine, and I know my friend Linda just had to recently put down her dog. So this is Sleeping with My Dog. Even with deer ticks, even with fleas, even with his snores, breaths I can't time with mine in those moments before both of us fall asleep, when his back paw begins kicking like a musician keeping a beat, and the white of his filmy eye rises into the night sky of his doggy mind. Even with these, and with the skunky waft of his silent farts, his dreamy woofs, which sometimes wake me, I sleep not really more soundly, but more contentedly than I would were I alone. The way a Neanderthal might have, firelight dancing along a wet wall, his arm draped over something furred and warm and respiring not quite in time with his own life-giving exchange in some cool and smoky room. I'll read one more from the book, and then I'll read you some new pieces. I'm always most excited about the new stuff. Another biblical poem, and it's one that closes this book. And it's titled Ararat, and in it it's a story of Noah as a very old man. Isn't he something like 600 years old? So he's a very old man who I guess we have to suspend our disbelief and imagine that he could climb all the way to the top of this mountain to see his ship and to look down on the civilization that has sprung up around it. Ararat. Years later, in spite of his weak knees, he might have labored up that volcanic peak to gaze upon the giant ribs of this thing he'd built by hand. The ship it was, sailing into view, as through the eyes of some half-starved songbird looking for a place to land. And because he'd hewn it, he might have run his hand along a cubit, the keel piece bleached as a bone and smooth, breamed by many days beneath the sun. There, above the tree line and below the snow, unsteady on his feet, fatigued, the ship he knew reduced so, when at its best it had quartered all those pairs of beasts, he would, no doubt, have reeled, not unlike the Lord seeing his failed creation. What builder wouldn't glance between the ruined futtocks and apprehend in the distance mud structures, smoke of cook fires, shapes of donkeys, dogs, goats, grazing sheep? Above the green plateau there is always grief, which, inspired, becomes the breath of life. I just got word last Friday that this one is going to be coming out in the New Yorker, which I'm very delighted about. Making love in the kitchen. We do it with knives in hand, blue tongues licking the bottoms of pots, steam fogging the windows from hearts of artichokes being strained. Hearts are made to be carved out, cooked soft, slathered with butter, fork stabbed and lifted to another's open mouth. We say we are starved as though we were doing this alone, lonely as an onion in its skin. Say we are starving when what we mean is that we want to postpone the inevitable, which is inedible, however we dice it, and so we make, as it consumes us, this love we call a meal. So this poem is also set in Oregon, and it's based on a news story from several years ago, which you may remember. I think he was the founder of CNET, and maybe the CEO, became stranded in his car with his family because of a freak snowstorm, and perished trying to go look for help. So this poem is inspired by that story. And the title flows into the first line. We were talking about titles tonight, and that's a kind of title I like to use occasionally when I can't think of a separate title and I want it to flow into the first line. God knows you stay in the stuck car, the snow, the remote road, a swirl of white like white-edged fear breathing down the collar of an Oxford when you've left your coat at home, when you haven't charged your phone or filled the tank, and you're stuck in a snowbank, 50 miles from anything like a building or a sign, wind wolves howling, wind chimes sounding like summer in the memory of the last trip you took to the little house by the river, just the two of you, the kids in school by then, God knows when. A September it must have been. A curtain sucking at the screen, sheets smelling clean before the sweat of making love, and the hollow, flute-sounding bamboo chimes you picked up God knows where. You stay there. You stay put. Wait. You don't run the engine and blast the heat and keep turning on the one cell phone when you know there are no bars, hoping you might see one, enough for a text, a quick message, a serious SOS. Nor do you rock it in reverse, then drive, stomping on the gas, digging the tires in deeper and deeper, time and time again. God knows why your wife, weeping in the passenger seat, gave you her coat and scarf and let you go. Why your son and daughter, shivering in the back seat like baby birds, their eyes looking filmed, nodded and let you go. And God knows why you tried it in the first place, driving into remote country on Thanksgiving in a storm. Maybe it was the Pilgrims, the Donner Party, Shackleton, Outside Magazine, cordwood in an iron ring on the porch of the little house by the river. God knows you can stare at a fire for hours when the snow's swirling beyond the frosted windows. You can stare at the flames till they lull you into sleep and dreaming. I was up at that place in the Adirondacks I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, just for a weekend visit. A poet friend of mine from England was there, and I was lucky enough to be invited up and to spend the weekend in this little room with a view of the lake. And I had many papers to grade, unfortunately, so I only wrote one poem while I was there, but it was something. Loons. Up to the black and light-riddled surface they rise, shaking out of nowhere, as memories do from their depths, uninvited, merciless, and buoyant with uncertainties. Tonight, seeing one noiselessly appear in the breaking lines of a full moon's bright writing, yards from the dock, I remembered your hair on a night when we were fighting. So much of it had fallen out by then. You were taking strands of it and strangling your thumb. Strange what rises, red-eyed and unbidden, with a beauty that strikes us dumb. Time for a few more? Yeah? All right. This summer I wrote a series of poems based on the paintings of J.M.W. Turner, and they all follow a similar structure of 6-line rhymed stanzas, and this is one of them. And I titled all of the poems after the paintings they were inspired by. This one is Fishermen at Sea. Now night becomes the great Leviathan, and what is cast out, the same question asked another way by several fishermen in an open boat. Somewhere near the prow, a lamp illuminates the here and now and the silver plating of a past flask. I have been at sea as well, as confused as the moon in the clutch of a black hand over high tide swells, sea-legged and bruised from bumping too often against hard things. Yet, there may be an answer morning brings when a vessel is dragged back onto land. But let me return to the present scene. It seems as though the boat could, at any moment, capsize, extinguishing both men and lamp. Seagulls wheel. The very air appears to realize that of fish there are none to speak. Of fools there are many. Thank you. I should send that one to Congress.
They wouldn't understand.
I wrote this one not long after the incident of the chemical attack in Syria. It's called Yellow Jackets. Ready barbed and bold-faced, they couldn't care less about how they're dressed or how I stare through a magnifying glass at the nest they've made between my two back doors. Their war chest weeps its nectar no matter whose big eye watches. Warm, long days come in short supply. Flowers are closing up their scented shops. Soon the Yellow Jackets will eat what they've stored, but for now they have a job to do, and they do it, patrolling yards and fields for sweet stuff and stealing it down hexagonal holes. Meanwhile, in hot, still sills, their countrymen lie stacked like victims of a recent gas attack. I'll sweep those tomorrow with a dustpan and brush. But these on the nest don't seem to mind my watching them. They're in a rush. It will be autumn soon, and there is a queen to attend to. Still, their desperate hurry makes me worry for them all, the way that God must have before man's fall.
3 minutes. 3 minutes of taken.
Okay. I'll end with this one. Returning to Iowa. Above the just-cut field, martins darted through the dusty air, diminishing astonishingly the swarms of gnats and moths orbiting the great round bales, which sat in their warm compactness like cakes on racks. Shadows grinned on the unsunned sides, and I remember us happy in a Midwestern way, stretched out and drowsy, a stop on a trip to Amana, your hand warm and wet in mine. A kestrel hovered above the ditch. A mile off, a pickup made a gray wake along a gravel road. A cow crested a hill and paused to contemplate us. Some things are not countable in their grace, so we pine for them. We remember them with kindness. We return them to the mouth to chew them a second time.